Hello and welcome to another short summary. This one is probably going to end up a longer summary, just like the 74 Super Outbreak video, and I have no problems with that. Shameless 1974 Super Outbreak plug here. Ah, fuck, I forgot to write that. Uh, anyway, this is the largest outbreak in recorded human history, the April 25th through 28th 2011 super outbreak. If you haven't heard about this thing and you're into weather, you must be just getting into weather, I assume. Or if you've been watching me for a while, then you would have definitely heard about this thing. So, what the hell happened? Also known as how? A powerful trough, or low, had started on April 25th. The the Cape was around 3 to 4,000 joules per kilogram on the 26th, specifically over Louisiana, Arkansas, and Texas. The next day saw Cape 1,000 joules per kilogram lower, 2 to 3K, but most notably saw a jet stream of 80 to 100 knots. That is going to produce shear like probably nothing I've seen before, I don't think. And that is absolutely insane. Uh-oh. So, darn. No, okay, whoops, sorry. Sorry, I thought I had something after this. My bad. Apologies. I'm not editing that out. I want to go more specifically by the day because of how notable this event is. By the 25th NWSSCP, sorry, SPC, not oh no, SPC NWS had issued a moderate risk of severe weather for 3 straight days. I've never seen them do that before, so that's just absolutely insane. Granted, I haven't been following weather for decades. I've only been doing it for 1 decade, so ha. I haven't wasted my life as much as other people. No, just kidding, just kidding. Um, sorry. By 1525 or 325, there was a PDS tornado watch that covered a majority of Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, and Oklahoma, or Tejas, depending on how Texan you want to be. A few hours later, 1924, not the year, the hour, Villona, Arkansas was under a tornado emergency for an EF2 wedge. It's right around the time frame that watches are set out for 4 to 8 hours. The 25th saw 42 tornadoes in total and 5 deaths as a result. The 26th saw a high risk of severe weather and a very large PDS tornado watch. This is pretty large for a PDS. This is like the normal size for a tornado watch, not a PDS watch. As you can see, over just one county in Oklahoma, but mainly over Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. By this point, the trough had separated into 2 separate low pressures, one of which causing a tornado watch for the Great Lakes area, and the second low caused this exact PDS watch and ran into shear. Thankfully, there were 0 fatalities this day from 55 total tornadoes. This is the day that you should know about, the 27th, 2011, April. The line that had been created in Texas that created 55 tornadoes had transformed into a squall overnight and continued to be that way in the morning. The SBC has now issued a 45% chance for tornadoes from Meridian, Mississippi to Huntsville, Alabama. 45% chance. There are even more favorable conditions than before, thanks to the early morning squall petering out and leaving energy high and ripe. By just 1345, 145, a large PDS tornado watch was issued for Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and Tennessee. 219 tornadoes in 24 hours. And side note here, 58 out of that 219 were in Alabama, 77 in Tennessee. That's around 60%. More specifically in Alabama, Huntsville NWS, which is northern Alabama, issued 92 separate tornado warnings on this day alone. The next day, the 28th, brought 47 more tornadoes that were relatively weak, mainly in Florida and southern Georgia. Again, these are relatively weak, and activity ceased around mid-morning, and the very last 10 of this outbreak came in the afternoon of the 28th of April, 2011. We finally get to the overview after spending 3 years on dissecting the day by day. This is the largest tornado outbreak ever. 360, one in Canada, over 3 days. That's an average of what? At least 100 a day. But again, there is the 219 in 24 hours, so it's not like that. Mother Nature doesn't care about averages. This event would tragically kill 324 people and it injured over 3,000. This thing caused $10.2 billion in damage. 22 states had at least one tornado. 56 severe weather watches. 41 of those tornado watches, and 10 of those tornado watches were PDS tornado watches. There are going to be 12 notables here, so strap yourselves in. Of course, we have to start with an EF5. The North Philadelphia to Missoulaville, only Mississippi would have a place called Missoulaville, Mississippi, EF5. See our track along with the strength on the track as well. I appreciate that a lot. Jackson NWS, who created this map, thank you very much. This is the first of 4 EF5s. For the record, all EF5s from this outbreak occurred on the 27th. This cell had formed at exactly 1300, well, not exactly, but 1300, so 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Was severe warned only 25 minutes later and was possibly tornadic at that time too. We do not know. But what we do know is that there's at least a touchdown at 14:30. I was trying to transform this to, and I almost said 12:30. That's 2:30 p.m. 2-foot deep ground scouring, as seen in this image at the upper right, was created, which is insanely deep, even for an EF5. The tornado dissipated at 1500, 2 hours after the cell first formed. This thing tracked 45.5 kilometers, caused $1.1 million in damage, and killed and injured 8 people. An image relatively similar to photos from the 74 super outbreak, a car nearly wrapped around a tree. Oh boy, give time for my cursor to go wibbly wobbly. No, but thank you much. Thank you NWSs for these radar gifts. I appreciate them a lot. This is the Good Hope to Union Grove, Alabama, EF4. Because the town of Arab, which was originally called Arad with a D as in D, No. But this is a true story. They misspelled the name of the town on the water tower, so just they didn't go through any trouble and just like, let's just rename the town to Arab. So, and then they did. This town is circled in pink on both the track and the GIF of the cell. Because the town of Arab was directly hit, this is known as the Arab EF4, or is he at least commonly called that. This thing tracked 75 kilometers in 58 minutes, would tragically kill 6 and injure 50, caused $1.1 million in damage, and its width maxed at 1.6 kilometers. That is 1 mile wide for the record. Again, like I said before, Arab was directly hit by this tornado at near its max strength. As you can see, this thing was relatively inconsistent for most of its life, although a large majority of this track is indeed EF4. This thing was multi-vortex, and later in its life was a wedge. And we can definitely see the multi-vortex in these top 2 pictures on the middle and right. I don't know about you, but that's one of the clearest pictures of some multi-vortex action I've ever seen. Our third notable here is the Hamilton, Alabama to Huntsland, Tennessee EF5. It seems like the only Tennessee, maybe Texas would have a place called Huntland. It's in Texas's nature to have a place called Huntland, let's be honest here. This EF5 was the first EF5 since 1998 in Alabama. 75% of the town of Hamilton was destroyed. This thing had a very long track, as we can see here, of 212 kilometers. It had a max width of 2 kilometers, which is well over a mile. A mile is, well, not well over, but that's 1 1/4 miles. I think that's right. I'm trying to do math in my head there, that's why I went silent. Brain blast! This thing would tragically kill 72 and injured more than 145 people. Vehicles were carried large distances and mangled beyond repair, some wrapped around trees. As you can see, pavement scouring in this top right photo. In this middle image, which is also connected to this bottom right image, this thing just looks like a wall cloud, but that's a tornado. That is insane. You never really think that that a tornado can really be that large, and yet there's a tornado and yet the El Reno tornado was twice as large. That's insane. And on this radar, I did put a green circle around this V notch here. You see these darker lines. That forms a V. Happens to be why it's called a V notch. That is because the updraft is so powerful. I can't exactly explain an inflow notch right now, mainly because I've somewhat forgot what it means or what's really causing it. Some might say I'm smart. Aside from me being dumb and not remembering what an inflow notch is really supposed to be, we are moving on to the Reform to Cordova to Blountsville, Alabama EF4. Cordova was already hit by EF3 damage at this point, by the way. And of course, Mother Nature had to one-up itself and hit Cordova again, this time at EF4 strength. Thanks, Mother Nature. This thing had an insane path of 205.7 kilometers long and was on the ground for 2 hours and 16 minutes. That's insane. That's probably the time it takes to watch all of my videos. Shameless YouTube plug here. Like, bro, don't watch all my videos. Again, Cordova is already hit by EF3 damage at this point, and I do believe that this photo where I've inserted red lines, in case you couldn't see the path of the tornado, was taken in Cordova. I do believe that this felled tree and the car on top of the tree roots was also taken in Cordova as well. It might have been Blounsville. I do forget, and I apologize for that. A 2-ton trailer, or 4,000 pounds, or whatever that is in kilos, was thrown 1.6 kilometers, or 1 mile. For those of you forgetting how many feet are in a mile, it's 5,280. Don't ask me why I remembered that. I don't like that I have. Although I couldn't necessarily find a definitive width, or at least I didn't put it on here or research it, whichever one. What I can see is that this thing was relatively narrow. The tornado cone in green, I almost said pink for some reason, right there. But there was very heavy condensation around this thing, as you can tell from this bottom middle photo. Our fifth notable here is the Smithville, Mississippi to Scottsville, Alabama, EF5. Using the town of, using the town of Hamilton right here as a marker, I have labeled on this path where the cell and mainly the rotation couplet is on this path. So to give you just to show you how far along that couplet is along its path. This thing tracked 60 kilometers and maxed at 1.2 kilometers wide. That is 3/4 of a mile for the record. This thing would injure 137 and tragically end the lives of 23. And caused $14.4 million in damage, mainly due to the fact that quite a few large brick homes, or just structures in general, were completely obliterated. This is an EF5 after all. Some deep ground scouring was evident, although I do not believe I could find any pictures of that ground scouring, or else I most certainly would have put it on here. You can truly see the width of this tornado by me inserting the green lines to show the cone. That's not even a cone at that point, that's a wedge. Halfway through our notables here is an F4 that trekked from Pisgah. I almost said Pisgah. Pisgah, or however you want to pronounce that, Arkansas to Trenton, Georgia. Again, EF4. I mainly circled the radar loop here just to show how defined the cell looked from Pisgah onwards, which is when the tornado touched down at. This thing coursed 75.6 kilometers and had a max width of 1,300 meters. This thing would go on to injure more than 50 and kill 14 people and cause $25 million in damage. Although I do believe I could not find any photos of this. It was indeed multi-vortex, erasing multiple structures along its path. And thankfully being inconsistent, and definitely inconsistent in path, this thing was moving anywhere from northeast to east to north-northeast. Thankfully not all at the same time. But, I mean, this kind of path and predictability reminds me of the 2013 El Reno monster. We are now more than halfway through our notables, and we get to the Tuscaloosa, Birmingham, Alabama, EF4. This was actually the second EF4 in just, I believe it was actually just 12 days for Tuscaloosa. Tus- Tuscaloosa, why am I doing that? And Birmingham. Birmingham also is also home to a WFO or just NWS office. This thing had a very long track of 130 kilometers. Its width maxed at 2.4 kilometers. This tornado injured around 1,500 and caused around 60 people to lose their lives. And as it did, and as it would by tracking through two major towns in Alabama, caused $2.4 billion in damage. As we can tell from this camera up here, we can see some very notable vorticity noodles. This thing would produce many of them. This screenshot is from a video that I found. And that's one of the most, and that frame is one of the most notable examples. I mean, there's at least 3 vorticity noodles right there. This one right here is probably just 2 with 0 condensation right here, but I digress. This thing was even multi-vortex along its path and was thankfully extremely well covered on air, which is, again, I'm very thankful for that. Technology has come so far, and the fact that tornadoes can be covered for their entire lives is absolutely amazing and can save many, many lives. 3/4 through our notables, the Factler, Alabama to Haletown, Tennessee EF4. This thing would track 49 kilometers, had a max width of 1.2 kilometers. This thing did not injure a soul, however did manage to kill a soul. Estimated to have caused around $30,000 in damage, as it did track through a forest for most of its life, only hitting towns around the very end and at the very beginning. This thing did end up destroying multiple well-built, sturdy homes. As you can see, was mainly, I would say, EF3 for most of its life. And you can see probably the true width of this tornado in this video frame here at the lower left. Part 9, you guys may remember Enterprise, Alabama. This is the Raleigh, Mississippi to Uniontown, Alabama EF4. Because this thing did indeed hit Enterprise, I have heard this thing being called the Enterprise EF4. And yes, there has been another tornado from an outbreak that has hit Enterprise. That is the most well-known tornado to hit Enterprise, called the Enterprise tornado, go figure. A very long track of 196 kilometers, maxing out at a relatively not very wide width of 960 meters. This is most definitely above the true average, though. This thing would kill 7 and injure 17, causing $26 million in damage along its path. This thing changed intensities rapidly and unexpectedly. As you can see here, tornado begins just east of Raleigh. Tornado first reaches EF4, so not very soon after. Tracks just a little bit. Oh, it's probably a little bit more than just a little bit. Maybe like 1 or 2 miles. I mean, there's not scale. It could be just 1 mile. Reached EF4 as it hit Enterprise. Again, crosses into Alabama, and finally ends in northeast of Uniontown, as you can see. Sean Casey, a relatively well-known tornado tracer, caught this tornado in 3D, and therefore he made the very first shot of a tornado in 3D. That's pretty cool. that that's pretty cool. This tornado isn't though. Tornadoes are bad. I know I said there's 74 outbreak. Tornadoes are bad, y'all. Tornadoes are very bad. Okay. Now I would expect this to be a town name in maybe New England or not in Alabama, but Fife. So the Fife, Alabama to Rising Fawn, Georgia AF5 had in the grand scheme of notables, relatively short, just under 60-kilometer long track, had a max width of 1.2 kilometers. I could not find the amount of people injured from this tornado, but I do know that it caused 25 fatalities. This tornado did cause around $150,000 in damage. The tornado became violent just after Fife. Thankfully, Fife was spared from the devastation for the most parts, I guess. Fife was still hit, which is bad, of course. But at least it wasn't EF5 at Fife. There was some minor ground scouring from this tornado. Ground scouring meaning that the tornado removed topsoil and lifted many large cement structures, which is very impressive. A school bus, or at least I think that's a school bus, that is school bus yellow, is, I mean, what is there? Only an engine, frame, and tires on this thing? That's insane. One of our last notables here, Shoal Creek Valley, Alabama to Cave Spring, Georgia. This is an EF4. A very long track of 157 kilometers, and it maxed out at a mile wide, or 1.6 kilometers. This tornado would injure 85 and kill 22. Over $360 million in damage was caused by this tornado, and it was a consistent EF4. Not inconsistent, consistent. Constant, I should say. This thing was on the ground for 1.75 hours. That is impressive, of course. Our last notable here, thankfully, the Ringgold, Georgia to Southeast Tennessee, EF4. This thing had a max width of 730 meters over a course of 77 kilometers. This thing tragically caused 20 deaths and 335 injuries and caused almost $70 million in damage. As we can tell from these two photos here at the bottom, left and middle, this thing was practically funnelless, yet at the same time multi-vortex. And as you can also tell probably from it being pretty dark, this thing happened in the evening, 8:15 Eastern Daylight Time. This tornado would be the last EF4 for Georgia until 2021 and is the 8th EF4 in the state of Georgia since reliable tornado records. We have thankfully come to an end of the notables, but there's still to talk about the significance of this thing, as you can imagine. And like I said previously, this thing is the largest tornado outbreak in history. Look at that bottom middle photo and that bottom right GIF. All those cells with that loop are happening at the same time. That's not like that image isn't like stitched together. Like I said before at the very beginning, only the 27th brought EF5s, and I actually didn't even know this until I was near the end of this Wikipedia article from this thing, it was actually preceded. So this super outbreak happened right after another super outbreak. This super outbreak that happened before this one isn't as notable simply because it produced a lot of EF1s and 2s. I think there is very few, if not any, EF3s. I think it was around 140. So just, no, it's like 196 or something like that. I do forget, though. I apologize. So that definitely got people's attention, and possibly just like the 74 outbreak, saved many lives. Big keynote here. This event is not as intense as the 74 Super. There are only 15 violent tornadoes over 3 whole days. Meanwhile, in 18 hours, the 74 outbreak produced 30 violent tornadoes. And just like the 74 Super, there were many parallel tracks and repeat offenders. Repeat offenders as in supercell, as in tornado families, sorry. So that means just one supercell producing tornado after tornado after tornado, essentially causing it to be warned across its entire lifetime. And that is all that I have for this tornado outbreak. Heckin', would you look at that, even longer than the 74 Super. I'm not surprised. A longish summary, this one is. I do appreciate everyone who came to this video, came to the end of here. Shameless YT plug here. Do the likes, do the comments, do the subdiddles. I'll see you guys.